Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but some of your English Bible translations, well, they're really bad. As you might imagine, if I'm going to make the claim that we're to follow the Torah, you might want to know, hey, did this guy look through all the New Testament texts that seem to say otherwise? Well, yes, I have. I've studied it a long time. Now, I'm going to share with you a particular text that was one of the first ones I discovered, and I'll tell you why it was a problem, what I saw in it, and the response when I talked to the actual translators, because it was an issue. So here we are in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is correcting either bad teaching regarding the actual law from Sinai or rabbinic law, stuff that God never said to begin with. So he's bringing these correctives and he says, you have heard it said. So what I'm going to read to you is out of the 1996 copyright version of the New Living Translation. Now, I should stop there to point out two things. Number one, it is the 1996 copyright version. So if you're going to fact check me, make sure you're looking at that because they do correct this particular error. Now, the problem is these Bibles are still out and about and people are reading them and they just can't pick up on these issues. So that's part number one. So I'm glad they made the correction. Number two, the New Living Translation is actually marketed as a translation. You see, in the same way we have The Message Today by Eugene Peterson, before that there was the Living Bible. The Living Bible was intended to be a paraphrase, but the thing is it's filled with bias. It's filled with what's called a replacement theology bias, and it's just a big issue. Well, anyway, Jesus is talking to folks and he's saying, hey, you've heard it said this, but I say this. And I'm going to read to you Matthew 5, verse 43. It's one of the first things that I picked up on. It's just important. You have heard that the law of Moses says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. So I'm reading along here and I'm thinking, okay, I need to test to see, is this in the Torah? How am I understanding the Torah? Because this is definitely Jesus saying that the Torah says one thing, but he says another. And that's a pretty big point. So the first thing I did was I looked to see, does the Torah say hate your enemy? Nowhere in the Torah does it say to hate your enemy. So that was kind of like alert number one. Something's going on here. Well, the first part, you have heard that the law of Moses says. Well, I thought, okay, I'm going to look this up in the Greek and see what it says. Well, I just happened to be a seminarian at the time, and I am going through the Greek Bible. I have my Greek Bible right here. And here's what it says. And I'm not going to say this super great because I don't read this out loud all the time. But it says, Akusate hoti erethe. And then the next word is a form of agape, which means you have heard it said, love. So the phrase law of Moses isn't even in the text. So I'm thinking to myself, whoa, wait a minute here. Why in the world would they insert that? Here's why they insert it. For what the biased translators thought would be readability. But it's not in the text. That's a big issue. And so here's what I'm thinking to myself. Holy smokes. I think it to myself today. I'm trying to teach everyone that we need to be following Jesus. And to follow Jesus, we need to be his disciple. To be his disciple, we need to obey his commandments he gave us at Sinai. And this seems to say something different. And so I'm thinking to myself, shoot fire. I'm trying to teach people something, and here's what people often tell me. They say, well, that's not what it says in my Bible. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. It doesn't say that in your Bible. And the reason it doesn't say that in your Bible is even though the original manuscripts were inerrant, all these translations, and there's big pressure in the publishing industry to publish the next Bible because it's like a cash cow. And so we want to come up with a new translation, and that's why we have all these translations. And we want to come up with ones that serve a particular political ideology, and we want to have the next study Bible. This is insane. We need to stay true to the text. And if you're a translator, I would just say this to you. Look, I know that there are different ways to translate the Bible, and some of it's very difficult, but man, stay close to dynamic equivalence. When you move into relevance theory and you start to try to discern the intent of the author, when you don't know the mind of God, that's why this stuff happens. Is these three translators thought they knew the mind of God, and then they started to put their own bias in the text. Stop it, we can't do this. All right, I'm gonna be done with my rant there. So here's what I did. I looked in the front of this particular Bible. I found the three gentlemen who did the translation, and then I emailed them. And you know what? They responded, to their credit. Now, if I were the CEO of Toyota and brakes were going out on my cars, I would recall those cars because it would be very dangerous. I would think that because, Moses says, I've set before you life and death, blessings and curses. There's something about following the Torah, being obedient in that way, that when we do it, there's life in that. This is, sure, we're saved by grace, but Jesus wants us to walk in life. And so I would think that if you're telling me here in this errant version of the text that Yahweh's Torah doesn't lead to life, then I've got a problem. We need to recall these Bibles. Well, one of the three translators was very humble and said, you know what? There's an issue here. I recognize that. This particular person didn't know what to do with it. Now, you need to know something. I learned this through this process, that Tyndale in this case, what they did was they basically hired translators. For the book of Matthew, there was three. Those three translators do it, best I can tell, an independent translation. They submit it to a stylist at Tyndale. The stylist does their magic, synthesizes those versions, and then submits it back to the translators, and then they sign off. And essentially, the humble gentleman said, you know what, I think we just kind of missed this one. We shouldn't have done that. The other two, however, were a bit more obstinate. Here's the thing about the scholarly community. I have a PhD. I know a lot about a very small sliver, and I shouldn't overstep my bounds. And a lot of times translators are in that same boat. They're very smart, no doubt, and many times they're doing their best, but they know a little bit about stuff, and then they apply their expertise, and sometimes they overstep their bounds. This is one of the times they overstep their bounds. So, all that to say, in Matthew 5:43, Jesus is not going against the Torah. This is a bad translation. It was fixed. I'm grateful for that. But this is just a start. There's many other texts in the New Testament that lead you to believe something that is not actually there. And so I'll keep picking these off one by one, but this is one of the bigger ones. I'll see you next week.